Welcome everyone to this episode of the Carbondale Interfaith Council Ralph Anderson Interfaith Dialogue. These have been happening since the mid-1980s and sometimes with one or two per semester. There have been some dry spells in between as leadership changes, but it is a wonderful tradition. And we are thrilled to be reviving it in this COVID time via Zoom, and thanks to the generous hosting of the Carbondale Public Library. If you're new to the Interfaith Council, I imagine most of us this evening are probably well familiar, but we do have a website and a Facebook page. We meet on the fourth Tuesday of each month, with some exceptions at 6 o'clock currently on Zoom, but usually in person. So you would be welcome to join us. Carbondale is very lucky to have the Interfaith Council that incorporates and has a community a place for faith communities to work together. And it is a wide variety of us that cooperate in Interfaith Council. These dialogues were an effort to bring faith communities, not only Jewish, Christian, Muslim, but the diversity within each of those together to talk about global, national, community events, and sometimes theological topics and how each of our communities respond to those. So there's been a wide variety of them. If we'd had this technology way back when, we'd have a whole catalog of them, which would be neat, but such is life, just good memories. So this evening's topic is how has COVID, faith communities in the time of COVID, and the questions for the panelists are, how has COVID affected and changed your faith community? What have the stresses been? What have the gifts been? What are you grateful for? What will you continue even after we get to meet in person, unmasked full-time without the restrictions we have at the moment? I'm very grateful for the wonderful wide variety of panelists we have this evening. Father Bob Flannery from St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church, and Miriam Link-Mullison from Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship, Imam Karim Abdullah from Masjid An-Nur, Dunkel from Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Rebecca Marten of Congregation Beth Jacob and the Jewish Federation. So we look forward. We've asked each of them to speak for about 5 minutes and talk a bit about these questions of how COVID has changed your faith community and what have the stresses been, what are the gifts unexpectedly that have resulted. So I'll invite Father Bob Flannery to go first.
Thank you, Pastor Karen. It's good to be here with you and everyone as we talk about the pandemic from a faith perspective. One of the blessings of a faith tradition, people of faith, is that we could reflect on our experiences in life and see how God is showing us something that we can learn from and help us with in the difficulties. St. Francis Xavier is partnered with the Newman Catholic Student Center here in Carbondale. So when the lockdown began, we started Zooming with the talents of Tim Taylor, the director there. And so part of our Catholic tradition is to have daily mass. So we had 6 days a week, masses where people could tune into and live stream. We changed the time to 9 o'clock every day, except for Saturdays. And we were able to worship together. And so people from all over the world, actually, some former Newman Center students who live in Brazil contacted me and said they were watching our live stream so they could be connected to us. We also did liturgies and baptisms or confirmations as that allowed. We also did on Fridays some kind of a service that the Newman Center did. And so whether it was praying the rosary or during Lent, the Stations of the Cross, even some of the students who were locked down in other parts of Illinois would do a music presentation during that time. So it brought people together, even though they weren't right here in Carbondale at the time. Our Hispanic community and at St. Francis Xavier also did a live stream for their congregation. Some of the difficulties that we experienced were our regular rituals, such as our funerals. I remember the first one I had probably 2 days after the lockdown was out at one of the cemeteries, one of the mausoleums, and it was just a funeral director and two people that were friends of the family who, and all the family members lived away, but we were the only ones there. But we did live stream it with a phone camera, and so people were able to watch it. So eventually, they still not yet done so, but they will do a memorial service, and that happened in other cases too. One of the hardest things that I had was having a wedding that we kept going down. As they said, you can only have so many people, and then finally the lockdown happened and we couldn't have weddings at all. So they had to postpone the wedding about 5 days before the actual ceremony took place. We also had confirmation, and rather having the bishop here, pastors are delegated to be able to do that. We had a new bishop that was assigned to the Diocese of Belleville, and his was delayed 6 weeks. But one of the blessings of that was usually when we, as ecumenical and a religious officer, I would invite people to be with us for the installation and ordination in the case of Bishop McGovern. But since it was restricted how many people could be at the cathedral, we did a separate service the night before with civic leaders and ecumenical and interreligious people from around the diocese. So we were able to have a larger group and a separate ceremony. So that was a blessing in disguise. Parish meetings discontinued for a long time. Eventually, some of them went back by Zoom. We also learned from it in terms of our homebound, because normally we would take communion to them every weekend. We couldn't do that for a while, but during the Advent and Christmas season and the Lent and Easter seasons, we had bags put together with some religious literature and other goodies for the occasion, and parishioners took those to the homebound, and they were safe. They put them on handles on the doorknob, let the people know they were there, so they were touchless. So we were concerned about the pandemic. We also had letters that were sent by one of the parishioners to the homebound on a regular basis, and so we kept connected that way. One of the blessings that's come from it is as we needed cleaning personnel to clean the church and everyone, we went back to in-person participation Father's Day of that year. So a number of those people helped out, and they've actually become members of our pastoral council and getting more involved that way. And the Zoom for like Carbondale and Thanksgiving, the Carbondale Library has made that possible the last 2 years. So we've done the best we can to really get more people connected. And again, from around the community and elsewhere, people get the links and they join in and are able to be with us. One of the difficulties has been the masking for some people. Sometimes it's been divisive. Fortunately, not too many individuals, but both of our parishes at Newman and here at St. Francis, but usually most people were cooperative. But there was a political aspect to it for some, and also polarization in terms of that. But fortunately, that was at a minimal. Here at St. Francis, we get a lot of people coming in asking for assistance. And so for the lockdown, obviously they weren't coming in. But then later on, they would mask and they would respect our requirement to do that. So it's been a learning experience for all of us. And I think with our other faith communities, we've had our Carbondale Interfaith Council meetings, and we've talked a bit about this. I'm glad we had this opportunity for our first Ralph Anderson Interfaith Dialogue to talk about this experience that's touched us all. So it's good that we're here, and we'll have more questions and answers that we can refer to later on. Thank you. God bless.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Father Bob. That was fascinating to hear. We'll turn to Miriam next and hear how COVID has affected the Unitarian Fellowship.
Thanks, Karen. This is Miriam Link-Mullison, and I'm the president of the board for the Unitarian Fellowship. And we have throughout the fellowship, just like all of the other faith communities, we've been challenged in a number of ways. We have kept kind of close to our heart what our driving principles have been, our full inclusion. So we don't want to exclude anyone from being able to access whatever we're offering. We've really kept the science and safety for both members and employees sort of front and center. We recognize that some activities create more risk, and we were well aware that things would change over time. And we really see those basic principles of inclusion and compassion really aligning with Unitarian theology. We did receive guidelines and training and significant support from both our regional and our national offices, but we made the decisions on exactly how we were going to put those in place locally, as we do all of our decisions. It's a local polity. We initially didn't have the resources to do Zoom, and so we were recording services, and we sort of had to scramble and get ourselves together to be able to offer live stream Zoom, but within a month or so, we were able to do that. We did have to purchase some additional equipment, and both sound equipment and other computer related equipment. But we have been doing Zoom, live streaming our services by Zoom since about April of 2020. And in August of 2021, we came back in person and continue to do live stream Zoom. So we're hybrid, and that's been helpful. We have about a third to a half of our congregation that attend every Sunday by Zoom. And as Father Brown said, it has given us that opportunity to reach out to people that have moved away from the area. So that's been kind of nice to see. We've had a former member from Germany attend. We've had people from who rejoined our fellowship actually and attend on a regular basis from Madison, Wisconsin. We really felt like that we needed to focus on connection and keeping the congregation connected, and that was a major focus throughout this pandemic. We've tracked who's attending services that we offer, and we identified that it was primarily our elders and our families that haven't been able to participate. And so we've added some additional efforts to try to reach them. We conducted drive-by visits to our elders. So we would stand on the curb and wave and sing songs and have a moment to chat and connect. And we've done that several times throughout the pandemic. We've also had drive-through events where people could come and we'd again wave as they drove through with their cars, and we would do a food pantry collection or something like that for people to drop off things. And we've offered family Zoom events, family afternoon outdoor events, and we've just tried to really focus on connecting. We've also added a card ministry. So everyone in the congregation is sent a card from another member of the congregation several times a year. We have found this, pandemic challenging, but we've also found that it has freed us up to think outside the box and to be more innovative. And, our drive-throughs, our roll-by visits, some of those have been very innovative. And a couple other things that have happened that have been real opportunities is all of the Unitarian congregations in Illinois have had joint services twice during the pandemic. So that was a really great opportunity. One of the things about being Unitarian is we're the only Unitarian fellowship in a fairly large circle. So we were able to reach out to other congregations. And another cross-congregational activity is last year we hosted 4 interns who provided services for our congregation, and we hosted them along with, I think it was either 4 or 5 other congregations. All of this was done virtually. So we've seen opportunities and been able to grasp those opportunities. Another challenge that we've faced is that our minister, Reverend Sarah Richards, has been on sabbatical these last 5 months. And so that's added an additional challenge to our response. But, you know, the bottom line, I think, for the Unitarians, for the Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship, is that this has really given us opportunities to grow and to connect. And I think if you were to ask different people within the congregation, they would say that they feel more connected than ever. Certainly not everyone, and we've had issues with the families and with the elders, but many, many people in our congregation feel more connected to our congregation. And I think one of our lessons learned from this is we need to be very intentional about making sure that people do feel connected. And this has sort of pushed us to be more intentional by reaching in the ways that we reach out to our congregational members. So I think all in all, we feel stronger as a community, and we feel that we've had opportunities that we wouldn't otherwise have had. And so we feel blessed in that way. So thanks for the opportunity to share.
Well, thank you so much, Miriam. Well, that was fascinating. Wow. A lot of information and a lot of insights. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Imam Karim Abdullah from the Masjid An-Nur.
Greetings to everyone. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for this opportunity so we can let everyone know what we did here at Masjid An-Nur. I think that initially when the pandemic came about, it was a jolt to our system because we closed down entirely for several weeks. There was some discussion as to how we would, reopen, how would we go back. So we followed the signs, and when we got the directive from the governor's office saying that we could operate with, I think it was a 1/4 of about 25% of whatever the total congregation could hold. So we reopened. And fortunately, our facility is large enough that, we observed the, what they call the distancing. We put the 6 feet markers down. We had enough space for everyone there. And I think spiritually what happened, we're so used to in our congregation that we stand shoulder to shoulder, and usually, the rooms is very crowded. And when we place the placards down and for the people to stand on, it was like you were praying individually. So it felt a little different. It felt a little strange to some of the people, but we managed to adjust. And so we began to, by the grace of God, have the ability to conduct our services at least with 1/4 of the amount of the people. We also would offer, we used to offer services, to the outer community. And one of our big services is the food pantry, or feeding of the people. So we were feeding the people, but we had to change it. The people would normally come to our food pantry and come in, go through the shelves, get what they need, or whatever we had to offer. So what we decided to do was we moved it outside. We moved it outside, and so the people of the community would come, and therefore we didn't have the contact directly within our facility. A lot of the other services, the personal counseling, a lot of things that we would normally do, we had to just cut back on it. And for the past year or so, we have had the ability to have the people come and and meet with them individually in certain areas. But overall, it's been very difficult, but we've adjusted well. We have a large community. We have an international community. We have many different ways and values and things people are accustomed to and used to. So we had to readjust the way that we think about or approaching certain things, and we did that. And we as a community, we got stronger. We felt that by communicating more effectively with each other. I also like to mention that we do have 2 facilities, so that helped also. We have a smaller facility that's located off of the Poplar Street, and so we were able to divide and split some of what we call our daily prayers. As one of the requirements as Muslims, we pray 5 times a day in congregation. And so to minimize the impact of people gathering in large numbers, we split. But the main focus was our Friday prayer, which is the congregational prayer that is very central for all of the Muslims. And we were able to have everyone, meet within our facility by emptying out our banquet hall and using that space, and as well as the prayer hall itself. Overall, it helped us. It helped us to come a little bit closer to communicate with each other. For those who needed the additional assistance, we were available. We tasked certain people to go talk to people to do certain things. So overall, we adjusted well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That's fascinating, Imam Abdullah. It's hard to imagine doing a food pantry outside. Wow, good for you.
It was, yes, it was, especially when it was cold.
Oh,
And
gosh.
can I mention one other thing? Because
Sure.
we have a tradition. We have a tradition for Thanksgiving. We feed the entire community. Normally, we distribute about 200 turkeys, to all the people of the community. So we would have it in our banquet hall, so we had to move that outside too. So we had to use our parking lots and have the people come by. It was a little cold, but it was successful, and we were thankful we were able to do that.
Yeah. Well, I guess the frozen turkey stayed frozen.
Yes, they did. Thank you.
Okay, next we'll hear from Kara Dunkel about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Kara?
Hi, thank you, especially to the committee that put this together, the Ralph Anderson Committee, and also our friends at the Carbondale Library that have helped us so many times with these Zoom and meetings. We're very grateful for that, because that's been part of our pandemic experience. Like many of you that have just stated things, Father Bob, you talked about funerals being difficult, weddings being difficult. Our family had personally had 2 pandemic weddings, very, very tiny, difficult, but also wonderful, very, very special that they were so small. The Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship, you got guidelines and training from your large organization, and you made choices at a localized level. We had some of that same kind of experience. We too focused on connections, and like you stated, Miriam, we also felt a lot of growth and just a lot more connection for many of us. And like you also stated, we just got to focus on those stragglers. Imam, I just love this sense of, you adapted constantly, and it's so impressive. And we too have done the same thing, adapting how we could have family night programs, roll-throughs like Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship was talking about. We have done a lot of service in different ways, as you're saying, making those adjustments, moving a lot of things outside, whether it was cold or it was blazing hot. But the biggest gift for us, or one of the big gifts, there's been many gifts from the pandemic, was that in March of 2020, when the pandemic hit, many of the families in our congregation were actually prepared for the pandemic, because 2 years prior to the pandemic, our prophet, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a doctor by profession, heart physician, heart surgeon, Russell M. Nelson, and the apostles announced a revelation to have home-centered, church-supported gospel learning. And this prepared many families that followed this counsel for this dramatic change that was going to happen with the pandemic, that would have such a limited structured church time and worship time. Since families were then worshiping at home more, they had prepared themselves for a couple of years, practicing worshiping at home, practicing singing and reading and studying scriptures all at home. So those that followed that counsel that was given a number of years in advance, well, 2 years in advance it was announced, but many people knew about it a number of years in advance because much preparation went into that in terms of preparing websites, preparing manuals, things like that. So many had much advanced preparation to be isolated. And we didn't know what the change was about at the time. I don't know if the prophet and the apostles did know. All I know is that they announced this dramatic change, that we were going to be a home-centered church, the poor did. Gospel learning is what was going to be happening. And so we've taken that to heart. And like I said, those that had followed that counsel, they've had their faith in the Almighty strengthened, and their faith in the prophets and the apostles has been strengthened. Those who did not follow that counsel have had varied responses, including, challenges with their faith because they're struggling. They're having more difficult times. Of course, those of us that were prepared are reaching out to them and trying to help them transition, and many are jumping on board. But of course, embracing people where they're at with their spiritual struggle is so important. Also, we've encouraged our membership to focus on what they can do. We've obviously, like everybody else, encouraged, Zoom meetings, but we've also encouraged the Zoom study groups. So different families can connect with each other and have study groups, learn from each other about whatever, but primarily scripture studies that we're all, right now we're studying the Old Testament. But we have encouraged folks to do things like gardening, getting outside, getting your hands in the soil, genealogy, family history, working with our website, which is familysearch.org. Anyone can go on it. It's free and available to the public. And it's a fabulous website. You can write your own personal stories. My husband and I started writing our personal stories, and it was amazing. Time would fly so fast, and organizing photographs. Also, we encouraged folks to be doing service projects, like I mentioned earlier. Of course, we're adapting our service projects to work with the pandemic, which means a lot of those service projects are going on in the homes privately. And we have a website that's called justserve.org. Any nonprofit, all of your faith traditions, and absolutely any nonprofit can post a service project that they need volunteers for, or whatever the needs are, if they need donations or things like that for their nonprofit. And we have encouraged folks to go to that website and to do things at home. And it's been amazing. People that are kind of coming out of their shells because they're getting so excited about the things that they're able to do at home. Again, that's a free website. Anybody can use it. It's justserve.org. And I think that in general, we have learned how wonderful it is to slow down and have more at home time with our families. We're having many less meetings and still developing spiritually and having great spiritual experiences. So I have been reminded many times of that beautiful scripture, be still and know that I am the Almighty. And as many of you have mentioned, we have also learned much about those that are lonely, need phone calls, need cards. I love the card program. We too have developed a card program. We've been writing cards to veterans, writing cards to whatever group we could think of to do a little good in the world. And it sounds like each of us are doing that in our different congregations. So thank you for the opportunity to share. I look forward to some questions later.
Thanks so much, Cara. Yay. The slow down part I identify with. I remember in the early days, that first March, driving by the mall and Walmart and seeing no cars in the parking lot. And, you know, of course, you worry about the employees and all that, but just thinking, I hope people are finding alternative, fulfilling ways to live. So, yay. Okay, let's go next to Rebecca Marten from Congregation Beth Jacob and the Jewish Federation.
Thanks, Karen. So good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Marten. I go by Becca most of the time. I'm here representing Congregation Beth Jacob and the Jewish Federation of Southern Illinois. The Jewish Federation of Southern Illinois is a small yet close group. We all work together when times are tough. Most of the interfaith community came together just a couple of years ago when we had an incident at our Benton temple. So not only do the Jewish community come together as a small group, the interfaith community does as well. So at the beginning of the pandemic, Congregation Beth Jacob shut its doors until we could figure out a safe way to get together again. During those first few months of COVID, I worked with the Jewish Federation as well as my local board members to figure out what we wanted to do. The first thing we did was to figure out how to celebrate our weekly Shabbat services. Our Sabbath is Friday night and Saturday. Congregation Beth Jacob does Friday night the majority of the time. Every once in a while, we'll do a Saturday. But we wanted to figure out how to do our Friday night services. The Jewish Federation had made the decision to do online services through Zoom. So CBJ, as it's easier to say, joined them on the Friday nights. The Jewish Federation also hosts Camp Ben Frankel, which is a overnight summer camp for Jewish kids and actually anyone. So it was open to not only the entire federation, meaning Congregation Beth Jacob, but also the Camp Ben Frankel family. So we all got together and celebrated Shabbat together. That first year, as we got closer to our Passover Seder, which was just about 3 months or so into the lockdown, was Passover. The tough decision was made to do it virtually. We knew that we couldn't do it together, but it was tough to figure out how we wanted to do it. So the Federation decided to sponsor it virtually, which was a very, very amazing thing to do. So like I said, we had been at lockdown for about 3 months, and it was lovely to see people again during our Seder. Even though it was through a computer screen, you know, like we are now. It's lovely to see the faces of my fellow panelists, and if I could see everyone that's here watching, that's just as great as well. So the planning for that Seder was done by the Federation, by our director and assistant director. So I was able to help with recruiting and the participation. It was, like I said, an amazing experience to be able to do something like that. So as the year went on, our high holidays were getting closer, and we had to figure out what we wanted to do as a congregation. Congregation Beth Jacob then we had a Zoom account at that time, and I was able to navigate our way through this new technology. As we were doing that, you know, Beth Jacob is an older congregation, as are a lot of congregations now. But sharing the ins and outs of how to make their way through the new technology, the new Zoom and everything, was foreign to everyone. So we all worked through it together. We all did it together. And because of the Zoom technology, we were able to have members who moved away join us for our Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. We had each coast represented, which was a wonderful thing. We were also lucky enough to have an outdoor space that we were able to do part of our services. So we were able to get together. We followed all of the CDC precautions. We wore masks and we stayed at least 6 feet apart at that time. We also, even though it was outdoors, the tables were sprayed down and cleaned as best a picnic table could be. So we followed those precautions to the T. So not only were we able to celebrate our high holidays, a hybrid bat mitzvah was done with just the immediate family in the temple, and friends and family from afar joined in on Zoom. A bat mitzvah is a celebration of the coming of age, something that we might consider a confirmation. I know others can help me explain this a little bit better. Confirmation, or in the Jewish faith, it's shown as the coming of age, becoming an adult in the eyes of the temple. So Zoom has allowed us to do all of these programs and allowed us to hold services on a semi-regular basis. And being able to be with our CBJ family and brought in faces that we hadn't seen in a while too. So when we did our own CBJ services, we were able to sit and chat with people we hadn't chatted with in years, which was nice. As the numbers began to decline and vaccines became available, we were finally able to start having services in person by following the strictest guidelines possible. As president, I wanted to make sure my faith family was safe at all times when together. So I reminded everyone constantly to keep their masks on, or I will ask them to leave. And I did at one point have to ask someone to leave if they didn't put their mask on. He complied and put his mask on, luckily. So we were happy with that. Sadly, at that time, when we started coming back together, we were not able to have an oneg, which is our after service fellowship with snacks and such. But as of now, as the numbers are on a steady decline and we are meeting again on a weekly basis in person, there's a small group of us, so we still keep our distance, and people wear their masks as they feel comfortable with it, or don't wear their masks as they feel comfortable. But it is nice to be back enjoying each other's company again. We haven't strayed too far from many of the precautions. I've allowed people to follow them as they are comfortable. And as far as we know, there were no contacted. Let me try that one again. We had problems with it. We're just trying to speak words earlier today too. No one contracted COVID during any CBJ activity. So we are very thankful and very lucky for that. And again, Karen, thank you for moderating this event for us. And I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, thanks to all our speakers. It's fascinating that there is pretty much unanimity in the growth that occurred and the connections that were made, better communication, being able to see people from far away. We've had the same experience too, which has been delightful. You know, there certainly are those who don't enjoy Zoom, but others certainly enjoy being able to come to study groups and meetings and not having to drive, that works better. Are there questions that panelists have of one another before we open it up to the participants or comments? Bob?
I have one for Imam. So were you able to do Zoom at all during your gatherings or in your community, or it sounds like maybe that wasn't necessary? I think you're muted. You need to unmute.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. Yes. No, we didn't have to do any Zoom. I think the initial difficulty was when we first had to shut down. In those few weeks, or however long it was, a month, that was difficult. And then after we were able to resume our services, but at a reduced capacity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just in the very nature of how we refer to ourselves as communities or congregations, asking people to do things solo is sort of against our nature. We are faith communities, we are congregations, we are together. And I heard Imam Abdullah refer to congregant prayer, that, some of us are comfortable praying individually, or that's part of our tradition, but I think a part of all our traditions is doing things together. Bill asked the question, is there any decision you made during the time that you regret as a congregation? I can think of ones that you regret having to have made, but you were stuck. But is there something you would have done differently? Well, that's good. No big regrets. Miriam, are you saying something?
Okay, yeah, this isn't really a congregational regret, but it's it's related. And that is, had we known that this was going to go on as long as it did, I think that we might have handled things like memorial services differently. I have to say that I feel really sad for some of our congregations members and or their families who lost family members now a year and a half ago, and we have still yet, we've had some small recognition kinds of services, but we haven't really been able to celebrate their lives. And but we didn't know it would be, oh, well, we'll do this when we can gather. Well, we have had a few memorial services. We experienced an inordinate amount of death during this time frame. I've been a member of that fellowship for 30 years, and I would say we had more death in the last 2 than we had in the previous 28.
And how much of it was COVID related?
There was only probably 2 or 3 that were COVID related, but in a 2-year span, 15 congregates out of a congregation of 110.
Wow.
It was just, and many of them were in their 90s, et cetera, but it really was intense. The loss was, and made more intense because of COVID, and made more intense because we weren't able to gather in the way we would. We had one member who was a younger woman, meaning in her 60s, who died, and we had a memorial service that encompassed several states, and I was so glad that we went ahead and did that for her. I feel bad about these other situations where that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I still remember that feeling that first Sunday that we didn't meet in March, and thinking, well, how long will this be? Will this be a couple weeks? Will this be a couple months? And who knew? In our case, it was a little over a year, and and having to learn the various technologies. And I was in a meeting right before things got back, probably a year ago, and it was a national consultant we were working with about something, and he said, wouldn't it be a shame if when all this is done, we went back just to doing everything the same way? And I have lived with that counsel. It's like, yeah, there ought to be, and your testimony, all of you, bears that out. There certainly isn't one of these congregations who isn't communicating better, isn't doing things a little bit differently.
I see one of the questions that talks about, will we continue to do Zoom? And we actually are still hybrid at St. Francis and the Newman Center. It's stationed at the Newman Center. So we will continue that probably indefinitely, just for those people who still don't feel safe to come together, or the people that are, far away, that type of thing.
Well, and we will continue to do it for the people we have added who are in Washington State or different places. That is now a different, I foresee, well, I don't know that we'll have to change bylaws, but faith communities, I know Christian ones anyhow, in the last 5 or 10 years have been rethinking what membership means. And I think this will add another layer of different definition to what it means to belong to a congregation. I think we're ready to take questions for participants. If there are any who would like to either put it in the Q&A, Jennifer, who is behind the scenes and running the show, will enable that to happen.
There is one in the Q&A or in the chat, if you scroll up just a little bit.
Did I miss one?
There's one from Sarah Faye Marten and one from Silas, which is the one that Father Bob responded to.
Yeah. Sarah Faye asks, as faith communities, when do we think we'll feel comfortable meeting with other faith communities for services or gatherings such as food within a program? And Sarah Faye, I imagine that means where social distancing isn't possible. And so that's a good question. Are people doing that already?
We are in terms of funeral luncheons, which we discontinued for a while, and there are fish fries going on in different places. I think people are being careful, but they're not as worried about it, probably in the good sense. So I think we'll be opening up more. I know with the Interfaith Council, we're still doing Zoom, which is convenient for people, but I do long for the day when we can come together again in person.
Karen, one of the things that I forgot to mention that we put in place to sort of deal with this up and down that we've seen with this pandemic is setting thresholds. So, we will do certain things when the transmission is at a certain level. So we have the threshold we've set for food is not until transmission is low are we going to be serving food. Well, no, that's not true. Moderate for food and low for singing. So we kind of came up with what were the higher risk things and what was our comfort level in relationship to the transmission levels that have now been set, that had been set on other criteria, but not that are now being set by CDC. So it helps us.
Aren't they lucky to have you as a former health department executive as the president?
It may have had a little influence. It may have. And I have to say those thresholds have been really helpful because it felt like we were making these decisions every day as we watch the levels go up, we watch the levels go down, and we're having to think, are we going to provide food at this memorial service or not? And I think we adopted those in the fall of this year in 2021. And we said, okay, we're going to live by the numbers here a little bit, and we're just going to offer and not offer as it relates to the transmission levels and what the recommendations are from IDPH and then from CDC.
And it was so hard to find those for a time, and especially with regard to singing. And I don't know about the others, but we realized how crucial singing was. There were people who said, call me when I can sing. And
singing has been really hard, and we aren't group singing yet. We do have musicians playing and singing, but we are not doing group singing as yet.
And it fascinates me sometimes how the congregations will make a decision. They'll say we're going to, and I appreciated hearing Imam Abdullah say we followed the science, and I think a lot of our congregations did. But then there would become some decision, and it's like, yeah, I think we lost the science on that one, and we need to reel it back in and get back to what the information says. And I have to say, my denomination wasn't particularly helpful with guidance. I depended on the Methodist. I found a Methodist website that had great guidance when I didn't go to the CDC or the county health department. But
right.
Well, and our Miriam, are you done?
Yes, go ahead, Cara.
Okay. Our congregation, we've got our bishop is a doctor, and so he works for SIH and works for other different hospitals, and he was fabulous at
Good.
letting everybody know where he felt the threshold were at. But in addition to that, and I know I didn't notice anyone mentioning about using Facebook as a connection, but we have a congregation Facebook page, and we have a retired professor in our congregation who literally has a book now of everything that has gone on in the region in terms of numbers by day, in terms of the statistics. And the recommendation was, if you don't feel comfortable, then don't come. If you're, when we finally opened up and we're starting to meet. So having his solid statistics of exact numbers of live cases, deaths in the area that particular day. He had hospital statistics, and some people were really getting tired of his statistics. But up until just recently, he was doing that on a daily basis for all of us through the entire pandemic. And for many of us, we talked about how there was some that it was really agitating to them because it was like, I don't want to know how bad it is out there. It's terrible. But most of us felt like could make some really good decisions about how we felt about meeting with a congregation or being involved with different things. So.
Thanks, Cara. Lorraine had a question in the Q&A asking, have our congregations grown or gotten smaller during this time? I'll add an aside if I can take that privilege. Each year we turn in figures for worship attendance and different financial figures. And so we're doing YouTube, not Zoom. So it's a little harder to count. You have the people who are online while you're streaming, but then over the course of a week, you have a certain number of views. And how do you count those? And they gave us certain guidance for that, but still, the numbers as they come out with the views we have on YouTube make it look like we've grown. And I don't know that that's really true, but I'll just, I'll do as directed. Becca, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Beth Jacob is a, like I said earlier, a small group. So our numbers have stayed pretty consistent. We have people that join us from, other faith denominations and just come and see what Judaism is about. So our visitor level has gone up a little, just because there's been studying going on during this time.
There's Emily's in the waiting room.
Karen, you're not muted. But we've been lucky enough that our numbers have stayed pretty consistent, pretty well the same. So happy to report that one.
Father Bob, are you going to add something?
Yes, our numbers, like it's Lent for us this time of the year. And so big crowds for that Ash Wednesday and all of that. We still have some people that are not coming back. Some might be because of the virus, but for some we may have lost too. But the other thing is financially, people have been more than generous. We've been really blessed. So those who can't come, they send in their envelopes or online contributions. So people have been very generous that way.
We've also experienced a lot of generosity during this time. We decided that we would do a campaign to pay off our mortgage last year in the middle of the pandemic, and we paid it off before we were going to do a 3-year campaign, and we paid it off in 4 months.
Mm.
Cool.
I mean, it was like, yeah, so I think we've seen that. And we are actually seeing a lot of new faces, which has been interesting. And we are welcoming them both on Zoom and in person. But we've had a pretty significant uptick of new people, it seems like.
I had a funny, thank you, Miriam. I had a funny experience, was in the co-op parking lot one day. This is pretty much mid-pandemic. And this guy says, Pastor Karen. And I said, and masks and all. And it's like, I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. And he said, oh, you've never met me. I watch online and I moved back to the area. I was a member of your church 40 years ago and now I'm back. And so it was nice to meet him in person. Things like that happen. Kara, you've got a hand raised.
Well, I feel like we too have experienced a huge amount of generosity, people giving their time, people stepping up and going over and like volunteering over at the warming center for many, many hours. And also many people wanting to go on missions to countries that have opened up. People that, I mean, it's just been an amazing, beautiful, beautiful time to see such a giving and outpouring. So yeah, we too have seen that. It's been very beautiful. I think hearts are changing. We're all becoming more aware of our mortality. This is all very limited, and I think the pandemic has made us more aware that stuff really doesn't matter.
Bob?
Yes, if no one else, you mentioned mortality. I know we're getting close to the end, but one of the things I forgot to mention earlier was, visiting the sick. We couldn't go to the homebound parishioners, but even the hospital. I'm on the on-call team, and for months we couldn't go, and then we had to wear shields. I anointed a number of people that had COVID from afar. One time I had to be at the end of the room. It was a big room, and a nurse actually with a Q-tip applied the holy oils for the anointing of the sick, and I said the words in the background. Just a number. And then I went to a nursing home one time. It's when there was a lockdown, so we had to be outside the window of the 99-year-old woman who would have turned 100 in a few months had she not got COVID. But at least I was there with her daughter outside the building to be able to give the last rites. So, that was one of the hardest things, not being able to be with people when they're dying. I mean, the family members experienced it too, but couldn't go over to the hospital and do all of that.
Very, very hard. It certainly was. Yep. Very much so. And I will be ready. I don't know what others are doing, but for those of us who celebrate communion, we have these goofy little hermetically sealed things that you peel the lid off for the little piece of wafer, and then this terrible grape juice underneath. And I'll be glad when we get back to the homemade stuff. And a lot less plastic. I thought at the beginning we should have figured out some craft project to do with those goofy things. But yeah. Well, anyone else from the panel want to offer a reflection from what we've heard this evening? I have found it oddly uplifting to hear your testimonies. Yeah. Well, I thank you all for participating. Jennifer has let us know we don't have a strict deadline, but don't want to hold you hostage either if there are no more questions. Oh, Kara?
Just a thought, we didn't really have an opening vocation or invocation of any kind, but it'd sure be nice to offer a benediction of gratitude for this great group of people, gratitude for the.
That's a lovely idea, Kara. I have one that I use most Sundays that I think could serve very well in an interfaith setting. It actually came from a French Huguenot in the end of the 1800s. And thank you all for being here. Thanks to the library and to Jennifer for hosting, to the panelists for speaking, to the participants for coming. It has been a delight. And then the benediction goes like this. It was originally in French, and I'm sure it's a lot prettier, but I'll do the English. Life is short, and we have too little time to gladden the hearts of those who walk the way with us. Oh, be quick to love, make haste to be kind.
Amen.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Amen.